Welcome to Cultivated Live for Tuesday. I always get this wrong. July 10th? 9th. Damn it. July 9th, 2024. I'm Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media, the host of this program called Cultivated Live. And since we launched Cultivated way back in November, our goal has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you with the most important, insightful, useful, and timely information. And we do that through our daily newsletter, which you can find at cultivated.news. We do that through this daily live stream, which is streamed through LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. So you can find all those things in the information below. And we hope you will subscribe, follow, like all of those things. On Tuesdays, we are joined by my longtime friend and dorm mate from the early 90s, Brad Spirrison, the founder and CEO of Grown In. Brad, good to see you this Tuesday morning.
Good morning. We were talking cannabis early and often in the early 90s, and it's a pleasure to keep on doing it in 2024.
It's funny. I posted on LinkedIn this morning in a promo of the show that it's like I put in I said it's the 90s all over again. Two Emory students talking cannabis and politics. That hasn't changed necessarily, but usually I don't think we were ever talking about the intersection of the two until very recently, but I'm glad we do that.
It's a true pleasure, and it's always great talking with you and talking weed.
I wonder if our resident advisor or our sophomore advisors who lived on our dorm would be as pleased now as they weren't then.
Well, when they were busting me back in January of '93, I could have just said I was doing some early due diligence on a venture that we would have 2 generations later.
I got a business idea. You're gonna love it. Yeah, they would have been like, I don't think that's gonna be a thing. And by the way, not in fairness, but a shout out to Georgia. They are very far behind on cannabis still.
They are. There's a nascent medical market there. And I have a bunch of former coworkers that are card holders and happy to be that.
Are they though? Like, is the weed any good? Like, is the access good? Are there conditions covered? Like, what do you know anything about the program down
there? They're very, very small doses, but I think still just. And these folks obviously have different sources outside of the legal market in order to get it. But psychologically, every time I send information about Grown In to some old friends and coworkers from Georgia, they always proudly talk about themselves as Georgia medical patients. And so we got to start somewhere.
GMPs, if you will.
GMP.
And for those that don't know, because Brad and I talk as if we've known each other for 30 years. Brad and I both went to Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, an even better school now than certainly when we went there. They never would let me in. I don't know what a high school student you were like.
No way.
Yeah, they would not let us in. And actually, I was telling you, which will transition into what we're going to be talking about. Last week, Jeremy, our editor-in-chief and my co-founder, had on Matt Zorn, who is the Substack author of Substack called On Drugs, but also an administrative law attorney and super versed in sort of cannabis and psychedelics law, came on to talk about the Supreme Court decision about the Chevron deference and how that is going away and what that means for rescheduling, if it means anything. And so I encourage folks to check that out. And I mention that because he also went to Emory, even though he's probably closer to half our age than our age, but a super bright guy. And you can see the improvement that Emory has made in the quality of students if you watch that and then watch Brad and I on a weekly basis. See,
it's fine. It's fine. I'm glad. I'll take credit for it, even if it's not necessarily deserved.
It still says it on our LinkedIn page that we graduated from Emory. Brad, in today's newsletter, I want to talk to you about it. And obviously, we talk about the intersection of cannabis and politics on a weekly basis for United States of Cannabis. And one thing keeps striking me that Minnesota seems to be getting things more right than not, which begs the question, why aren't other people following Minnesota's lead? And the latest news is that they're allowing breweries on tap to have cannabis and THC, hemp-derived THC beer.
Well, I think more things right than not from a consumer's perspective in terms of access to the plant in a form factor and a social setting i.e., out of a tap in a brewery, in a bar, and anything not encapsulated in a bottle or a package, which just speaks to the general accessibility of cannabis. And while we talk so much about cannabis normalized, the regulated THC market normalizing through rescheduling and efforts for safe banking, what really is happening, particularly in Minnesota and really in other places around the country, but Minnesota is the leading edge, is that consumers are really accessing the plant in normal ways, in public ways, in social ways that they haven't before. And we're seeing, as a result of the 2018 Farm Bill, really a legalization of cannabis happening, as on that other front, the cannabis industry is trying to break through in other realms.
Yeah, it's interesting though, and I'll shout out my editor-in-chief, Jeremy Burke, who often talks about that the regulators, specifically in New York, weren't really thinking about consumers first, and I don't think a lot of regulators are, and that has been, I think, a lot of the missing link, if you will, between a state going legal and having a normalized market and not. And I even shout out sort of a Maryland and a Missouri, Ohio, and many, we'll see, but like where consumers want access from day one, right? There can't be this big gatekeeper of legalization saying, okay, we're going to have legal cannabis, but we're only going to have these 10 dispensaries in a massive state. And from day one, if you have consumers having access straight away, it helps a lot usher in a new market. Minnesota sort of ushered in by mistake a hemp-derived THC market early days, and now is sort of continuing, now sort of regulating in some ways. But consumer backwards thinking, like, let's think about the consumer, work backwards, how they're going to want to access it. They're going to access it anyways, so let's make it legal. It's an approach that not many states have taken, or countries for that matter, but one that I think is worth exploring if I were Georgia, for example.
Most definitely. Now it's that same thing. There's 38 different markets, right. Legal markets. And so, the states are laboratories for how we're ultimately going to see national and federal legalization. And this is certainly, in the case of Minnesota, the most aggressive model in terms of enabling hemp-derived THC. Now, you could look at it from the other perspective, from the industry perspective, by saying, well, wait a second, this isn't fair. I'm in the industry. I want to get into the Minnesota market. If you're a Verano or a Cresco or a Vireo, which I believe is based in Minnesota, how are you going to compete with other hemp-derived THC products and companies that don't have to go through the same regulatory hoops? And from a consumer's perspective, how do we actually know that these products served in breweries and out of the fountain and in edibles and everything else are actually tested to the same degree as others?
Yeah. Yes. And absolutely. And you have this sort of dual market, if you will. But then I think we've even seen recently companies like Curaleaf saying, look, we see what's happening in the hemp-derived space. We're going to get into that space and this space because we think this is going to be a really good way to build brand and build market share. And it is an interesting time to watch. If you are a real cannabis industry insider, it is interesting to see where different companies, people, associations are coming down on this hemp-derived conversation or debate. And those that like want to fight it, like, we can't have that because we went through all these hoops to do it. But again, that is like almost I would argue, is like a regulated, the mind of a regulator, right? Like, it's so the dichotomy is clear, but if you work back from a consumer and say, what are consumers likely to do? They're going to get THC beverages, edibles in the easiest way possible. And how do you sort of build your business around those access points?
Yeah, the Curaleaf, I think that's kind of a watershed moment in terms of the regulated industry. You have three classes really in terms of the regulated industry, in terms of how they approach hemp-derived THC. You have those like Curaleaf that if you can't beat them, join them, and why don't you go ahead and get into the market? You have others that will tolerate it so long as the compliance and the regulation and the standards and the hoops are the same for hemp-derived THC as they are for licensed cannabis. And then you have those that just want to purely shut it down, like in Illinois. You have a huge lobby trying to criminalize hemp-derived THC, pointing out the fact that it's untested and everything else. I think Curaleaf, being obviously the largest operator in the United States, and I believe the largest operator in the world, going into the hemp-derived THC market will cause other cannabis companies to get into that market. And, you know, we're seeing this unparalleled path, just as we're waiting for, God willing, rescheduling to happen sometime in 2024 within the, this Biden administration. We're seeing this punch through. And again, from a consumer standpoint, I don't think they necessarily care as much as we do, so long as they have access and so long as there is at least some conditions of safety and understanding in terms of what they're getting into.
Yeah, it's as we said, this is why we like to do this on a weekly basis, because things change so rapidly. And that announcement from Curaleaf was like 2 weeks ago, June 24th. So things are changing rapidly. It'll be interesting to see how others either follow or fight. I guess is those follow, fight, or say nothing. I guess those are the options. But things are certainly happening, and I think when the book is written about legalization in the U.S. by you, Brad, in 5 to 10 years, Minnesota will be more than one chapter, and the influence will be great, and it'll be sort of the highlight point of sort of hemp derived, what it means. And also, let's not undershoot the fact that I believe hemp farmers have a big influence in the state of Minnesota, so it's not always by accident.
I think it actually goes back to this politics. Former Governor Jesse the Mind Ventura helped usher in this with his early advocacy for cannabis legalization back in the late 90s.
Yes, and we're old enough to remember him as a wrestler, and that he wasn't the mind, he was the body. But I can't call him the mind. I have to call him Jesse the Body Ventura, and I can't call him anything else. I don't think I can call him Jesse Ventura or Governor Ventura. Only Governor Jesse the Body Ventura is the full moniker I have to use.
Don't forget the actor and the famous line in the Predator movie, "I ain't got time to bleed."
There you go. See, you have a better mind than I do. So maybe the cannabis in Canada is a little bit stronger. Well, I was also telling you we had a big weekend at I'll shout out the Mariposa Folk Festival because I was so impressed by it. But Brad, we'll see you next week. But also a little bit more. I'm going on a cannabis road trip, summer road trip. I'll be through upstate New York, visiting dispensaries, manufacturers, processors, growers, heading into Vermont and New Hampshire, and eventually into Massachusetts. I will share the full itinerary when it is locked, which hopefully will be tomorrow or Thursday. But Brad, it's always good to talk to you and talk intersection of cannabis and politics. Thanks for making time.
Thank you so much, Jay.
And that is it for today's Cultivated Live. We encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter at cultivated.news. Follow us on LinkedIn. Smash the subscribe button on YouTube. Even on Twitter, if you see this on Twitter, and there's a bunch of you who can see they're watching now, you can follow my feed. That's fine. I don't post a lot except for this. Tomorrow, I'll be back at 10 a.m. Eastern with Jeremy Burke, the co-founder of Cultivated Media and our editor-in-chief. That'll be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. And remember, everybody, it's the dog days of summer, a great time to buy cannabis at your local dispensary. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.